Hi, guys, and welcome to the Gin and Tonic Show. We help Muslims and non Muslims to handle Islam in the 21st century. My name is Mustafa, and this is my co host in the nick of time. If you wish to talk about Islam, the ideology, you have come to the right place. We cover current Islamic news, Islamic scripture, some crazy comments, and a weekly topic about Islam to examine, critique, and analyze. If this is not enough Islam for you, please drop by our Discord to discuss any further questions about Islam. We condemn any form of discrimination, violence, misogyny, slavery. However, we do embrace free speech and criticism if it's factual and correct. Thank you for stopping by and enjoy the Gin and Tonic Show.
Hello, guys. Welcome to this episode of Gin and Tonic. We have our special guest, Author Faiz King.
Hey, hello. How are you guys?
Yeah, so today we got a special episode that we're doing. This is almost not even almost, but this is a thanks to Author Faiz King for coming on, spending his time,
Thank you
giving
for
his
having me.
input, and doing it without the use of death threats, which is quite rare, which I came to know. So thank you for doing that, and we're
Mm-hmm.
going to be doing a small review of not review but a Q&A about his book, The God Evolver, a secular approach to divine. The link is in the description. So without further ado, I'll just hand it over to Offer King. If you want to make a brief presentation, introduce yourself, please giving a brief summary about what your goals of with the book are, and why the audience should purchase to read it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I believe to a large extent that I'm bringing a very unique view to the audience because I do have that dual science and religion background. I think one of the main issues right now that you have is that you have religionists speaking very definitively on scientific issues, evolution or theory, for example. And these are areas where they have not studied. They barely know the definition of theory. They conflate it with hypotheses, and gets very messy, gets very ugly. And there's very few folks that you would see that has this kind of a background in religion and science. Hamza Yusuf, for example, he has that nursing background. Mohamed Gilan, he's a physician scientist. He's in the neuroscience. But even then, when you have people coming from this background, there's this kind of tendency to play it safe, to be aligned with a certain school of thought. And that's where I come in, and I don't believe that it makes sense to be completely aligned to one particular school of thought, to have your allegiance there. So, yeah, so I do feel that this is one of those areas where it makes sense to kind of look at holistically. And I do have that interdisciplinary background. I've studied psychology, I've studied anthropology, I'm a physician scientist. And for the past 25 years, I've been actually studying comparative religion. I'm no scholar, but I do feel that I have significant input. Now, I don't expect the audience to read my book and be like, okay, I believe in everything this guy presents. That's just ridiculous. Even if you could take something out of it and make sense out of it, or that I've been able to kind of elucidate on certain factors, or bring a new perspective, I think that that's enough. Um, I rarely read books and be like, okay, I believe in everything I read here. That's not the way moving forward.
But yeah, that's a really nice thing that you're doing, trying to put your perspective of both science
Hmm.
and religion together in a book. But I know that both um, fields are very broad in their own domain. So, is there in the book? Is there a particular sect of the religious side and the science side that you're trying to compare, or is it a general sense?
What I'm trying to actually do is take metaphysics and the language and the vocabulary of metaphysics and making it mainstream. So the issue with science and religion, where they disagree, tends to be mostly in areas of semantics. Um, so there are certain words that we use that kind of restrict the scope that a particular verse or a particular way of thinking goes. So when you go back to the metaphysics of these different religions, what it does is it kind of opens that door, leaving things a little bit more flexible. And to a large degree, a lot of the folks that actually developed these different, radically different fields of science were fellow religionists. They were very dedicated religious people. And to some degree, that language that you do see in metaphysics has been retained by science. So what I set out with this book was basically, okay, what if I could go into the classical literature and connect the dots to look for example, the theory of evolution. Was it actually a scientific theory, or does it have its origins in religious thought? And surprisingly, I did find several references to the theory of evolution, or very basic concept of evolution in the different religious traditions.
So yeah, like it that is quite an interesting perspective here. So on that note, like I just want to mention that I've read the book. Moose also read the book, but due to
Mm.
personal issues, he might join later on in the show. But as of now, he's not here. I'll be at, and a few other audience members in the live stream here also read the book. So
Mhm.
what we're gonna do is do a Q&A,
Mhm.
and I'm Moose and I both reading the book have some questions that we want to ask you to discuss,
Mhm.
and we're also going to open it up to the audience to come on and for those who did read the book or have some questions related to what you just mentioned wanted to ask you upon.
Yeah, that sounds great.
So yeah, if you're ready, we'll get started with that.
Perfect.
All right. So my first question to you is this is you mentioned this in the very beginning of the book that you don't follow the traditional religious perspective.
Mhm.
So what do you think are the main differences between you and what a traditionalist or a fundamentalist would believe?
Yeah, one of the issues that I found was like when I was growing up, I've studied various types of religious ideas. At some point, I even had a friend who was Christian, and he's like, "Oh, look into the Bible." So I did. I naturally looked into that. My mom, she encouraged very open religious thinking. She said read the material from Buddhism, the Jehovah's Witnesses, whatever they give you, read it. So I've had a very open way of looking at things. And throughout my college years and post college years, I've kind of bounced around between different sects, different movements, underground movements, even ones that are kind of geared towards eschatological modes of thinking. So at some point, I did kind of develop an inclination towards mysticism and metaphysics as well. Um, the problem I see with folks that tend to have a more fundamental approach is that since they've been trained in a few schools of thought, maybe just one school of thought, that's basically the only lens that they have. So when you try to introduce something different that may be possibly even complementary, they don't see it because they have this reaction, this response. Like it's not going to go through their filter and make it out. It'll basically be like, no, this is bidah, this is an innovation, this is not appropriate. And I've also noticed that, generally speaking, like the mainstream religionists, they kind of look at certain works like the Hadiths, for example, and they put it on a pedestal. So there's that appeal to authority that you see with fundamentalists and mainstream. And for me, um, and I'm not saying I'm completely objective either, but for me, it's like I'm open to different views, different perspectives, different schools of thought, and none of my ideas, none of my frameworks are static. It's basically like, I have this view, and over time it's going to develop because as human beings we were created to evolve, to kind of expand our horizons. We're dynamic organisms, so why should we you know just be set on one way of looking at things? That's not how we develop.
For sure. So that's actually a very interesting point, and I think that leads to my next question here of your general viewpoint. Now, I know you don't fit quite into the definition of agnostic or the traditional definition of it, but my
Mhm.
question would be that because you're so far from the traditionalists in terms of your views, do you find, I really want to ask this, do you identify with yourself being closer to an agnostic or no? And if you can just expand on why you came with that answer.
Well, agnostics, I generally feel, are some of the more open-minded folks, the ones that are just strictly agnostic, both in spirit and both in approach, because they leave everything open, right? They're kind of like they analyze sources. If you give them religious ideas, they're not going to dismiss it offhand. They're going to look at it. If you give them, atheistic material, they'll look at it too. So they're always open to ideas, and that's something I completely respect about agnostics. They're not dogmatic. So in a sense, I kind of have that approach too. It's like I've been trained in the secular sciences, right? So I've been brought into this system, so I know how people think, outside of religious schools. And independently, I've also studied religious literature, and I wasn't like, okay, I'm gonna just read the Quran and that's it. I read the Quran, I read the Bible, I read the books of Enoch, the Gospel of Thomas, I've read the Dhammapada. I've dabbled into Zoroastrianism as far as reading, and I looked into the Kabbalion, the Corpus Hermeticum. So all of these different ideas I've studied, I've looked into. And someone could say, hey, you have an agnostic way of looking at the world. But this is where I won't be able to reconcile my views with an agnostics. Like, ever since I've been young, I've always believed in a greater power. It's not something that I can remove. Like, no amount of deconverting or going through a secular system is going to be able to take that out. And for me, I've always felt that belief has to be based on a rational understanding of the world. So even for me, belief is not blind faith. That's not how I look at things. So on the one hand, I find myself aligned with the agnostics. On the other hand, uh, while they have an uncertainty about the existence of God, for me, I feel more uh, certain in that respect that God does exist, even though proving the existence of God is definitely something that's beyond the scope of like anyone here, actually.
Now, would you say on that note that there that having this blind faith that
Mhm.
there is a higher power, but we don't know what that higher power is?
Mhm.
Would you consider that as something as unscientific, or would you consider that as similar to making a hypothesis and just trying to find evidence that matches that hypothesis?
It's a framework. It's a perspective. There's the idea of a belief in God. Is that unscientific? It's something that's not scientifically measurable. So in that sense, you can say, hey, it is an unscientific mindset. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's false. Not so, because science also is not a static kind of venture. It's like science moves forward, and every decade you come up with new ways of looking at things. Technology changes. So belief in God, I would say, rather than using terms like whether it's scientific or unscientific, I would say it is as rational as not believing in God. Like, one cannot say that belief in God is less rational. I feel as long as you're able to justify it, as long as it gives meaning to you, then it could be a rational response as well.
Now, on that note, so I'll move to the next question, which I think is
Hmm.
very much related to what you mentioned here. What would your so I'll rephrase it. So why did you choose to take the Quran or whatever religious
Hmm.
text that you're reading in such an allegorical or metaphorical sense,
Hmm.
and compare it to with a scientific approach as compared to traditional scholars who suggest for you to reach that level of spirituality or become closer to God, take it in a very traditional sense?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I do feel that, like, to a large extent, having that philosophical approach, it opens windows, opens doors. It's kind of like, if you're too literal about the world around you, you're gonna miss a lot of things. Because, for example, let's say we're speaking about the Quran, right? The scripture itself, it's poetry. I mean, where do you see poetry as not having metaphorical meanings? I mean, as far as human civilization, from the very beginning of time, any work that has a poetic bent has some element of allegory. It's can't be taken absolutely literally. Now, I think the problem now that you see with people that tend to be more secularly oriented is that they kind of look at everything as absolutely literal. So that is a problem. I feel that to some degree, we should be able to look at metaphysical way of looking at things, metaphorical way of looking at things, taking into account the esoteric chains of narrations. Because from the very beginning, we're told that the Quran has multiple layers. Now, even with the Bible, there's been a tendency to look at things metaphorically. When you can't explain something, they're like, okay, well, let's explain it metaphorically. But we have to look into the extent of the passages. I remember one day I was watching a Christian program on TV, and they were talking about the Magog and the Gog, and the guy was like, literally, he's like, yeah, the Magog and the Gog, they live within you. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, there is definitely a limit to how much we can extend metaphorical discourse. But I do feel that, to a large extent, that different religious scripts, that they're multifaceted, and we can't rely too heavily on a literal way of looking at things, or go the other way and have this exaggerated understanding of the scripture. There should be some balance, and we should. My approach has always been to take the not multi, the interdisciplinary route, where you incorporate different ways of looking at things.
Now, I know this is going to be a very not a non-straightforward question, but thinking
Mhm.
clearly did mention a good point here. So, in your opinion, what do you think the answer to this would be? I put it up on the screen.
How do you determine what's literal and what's allegorical?
Yes.
Um, I mean, that is definitely a good question. Like, when in doubt, you should start at the at the literal meaning. That is the base meaning, right? So whenever you read something, you look at things at face value. It's only when things get hairy, or where things kind of go against the human response, because Islam, for example, is a natural religion. So when you see something in the verses that kind of repel you, that's not supposed to be the intended response, because the religion itself was supposed to be aligned with the natural order, very similar to Taoism. The ideas are basically supposed to be an extension of the natural world. So when you see certain verses that kind of cause you to recoil or to be repulsed, it's probably a cause for concern. And most likely at that point, you should go into the etymology of it, the semantics, word frequency, um, even revisionism to some extent, because there's a possibility that it may have been misinterpreted. Because sometimes there's a tendency to fixate on meanings that are more aligned with the society at the time. So if you live in a patriarchal society, and that's just how the majority looks at something, you might kind of hold on to that meaning and fixate on a meaning that it is inherently patriarchal, and that might not be the case. It might have a more universal bent, but because you're taking one particular meaning and holding on to it, that's where the problem lies.
But on that note, when you see,
Mhm.
let's say, someone like, I think I sent you the video yesterday of Mohammed Hijab
Mhm.
saying that pedophilia is okay.
Right.
It's a 2-minute video. You go look into it. And how can we subject our current fact or our reality in present day
Mhm.
based off of a book that was written by people 1400 years ago? Because if, like, on an example, I'll give you an example.
Mhm.
Let's say you were fighting in the 1800s in the Civil War. You were holding a musket, and the
Mhm.
most damage you can do is just with on a horse. You shoot a musket, and someone dies 100 yards away maximum. He goes to sleep, and just in the 200 years that he's been sleeping, we went from not even being able to kill the person 10 feet from us to being able to level a city in World War II. So how can someone 1400 years ago who wrote a book tell us how to live in our reality in present day?
Yeah, I mean, to a large extent, they said that the Quran was a scripture meant for all times, and that Muhammad was sent to all people. So, because of that, we should look into a more universalist kind of reading of the Quran. When Muhammad Hijab actually emphasized pedophilia or whatnot, you know, you could find scholars such as Mufti Layth or Imam Aziz who will argue against the whole Aisha age using, like a very logical understanding of the hadiths and the chronology, and comparing the different linguistics involved. But that Quranic verse about, for example, not having menstrual irregularities. I mean, we could look at it in another way too, because there are a good proportion of the population that have irregular menstrual cycles. They might have PCOS, they might have hormonal issues and dysregulation, and that also appears in the hadiths. So depending on the scholar or the hadith, you might find varying interpretations. So what I'm telling you right now, it might seem odd, but then if you go back into the sources, you could actually find people saying, "Oh, this could be due to hormonal irregularities," which isn't exactly uncommon. Um, so because there are varying ways of looking at things, kind of fixating and saying, "Oh yeah, this is about." Prepubescent unions. That's kind of a little bit um, narrow that perspective. Now, why did hijab mention it? That I have no idea. I mean, there are so many other topics that are more pleasant and more appropriate to talk about. Um, so that's also an issue that we see. Why do certain Muslim scholars kind of fixate on certain things? You could go to like a khutbah and they might talk about like something like polygamy, but no one in the U.S. can technically practice polygamy. It's not possible. So why even bother dedicating an entire Friday sermon on it? Sometimes you have to kind of question what's going on in the mind of the person bringing it up. You know.
For sure. So on this note, like I really need to harden it, some points on traditionalists here as well, because
Hmm.
it's something that I grew up with in my community too,
Hmm.
where there's certain things that we know as a reality or are true because we can observe it with our senses.
Hmm.
For your example, I can bring up you do. It's mentioned in the book as well that you have an MD, you're a doctor, meaning you probably took some immunology or pharmacology classes.
Hmm.
In there, if you were to let's say look in a microscope and we see bacteria becoming resistant to drugs, it's evolving. We have scientific proof that let's say evolution exists. But then
Mhm,
there's people who fight in schools to argue against that.
mhm,
And if you look at, and people might say, oh, it's not common, but like if you look at stuff like the religion, Richard Dawkins going to various religious schools and such, it's very common that they're teaching that such
mhm,
scientific facts are false.
mhm.
What would you say to such traditionalists that keep on fighting for something that's factually incorrect?
We have to understand that a lot of these traditionalists, a lot of these religionists, they have a very delusional, warped way of looking at the world, right? When you're confronted with facts, ideas that really can't be contested because the science has been done. There's actually a methodology out there, and there's a body of evidence or facts that you know um, point towards a theory. At that point, you can't be like, okay, there's a conspiracy going on. That type of thinking is very delusional. And a lot of Muslims, a lot of Christians, a lot of any religious background, you find these people kind of contesting what's out in the actual world. Um, we can't pay attention to these guys because they're creating noise, and sometimes they don't understand the sciences because where are they going to get their sciences from? Like at most, Bill Nye the Science Guy, unless they've actually went into college with the intention of taking these scientific courses or getting a PhD or working towards understanding science. These people, they haven't been sincere in terms of looking into the scientific literature. What they're seeing is they're looking at certain journals, they find certain specialists, and most of these times, these are like the rebel physicians or the rebel scientists that kind of go against the grain, and they'll bring these ideas that are not peer reviewed, and you'll see these religionists. They'll kind of focus on these guys, and that's very dangerous. So when in doubt, just go with what's out there, what is peer reviewed, what is accepted by academia. Because these religionists, if they actually bother to learn the science, like at a career level, they might actually change their mind, but they don't. So.
Yeah, there's actually this I forgot the name, but Richard Dawkins was
Mhm.
talking about it. I forgot the name of the scientist. He was a brilliant geophysicist, I believe.
Uh-huh.
He got his degrees from Oxford and MIT.
Hmm.
And at one point, he actually sat down and was like, "Oh, what I learned in my Bible and what I learned in my science class are contradictory." So
Hmm.
he pulled up a Bible and took a pair of scissors and I'm going to cut out everything that goes against science or what I learned in science. And then when he realized he had to cut out almost 60%, 70% of the
Yeah.
Bible here, he's like, I cannot do that. And he just dropped his entire science education, which is immense, right? So, uh, in a way, there are people who getting your PhD from Harvard is not a simple joke in terms of science. That you probably had millions of dollars of budget to
Hmm.
make research projects and pretty much reach the pinnacle of success there.
Hmm.
But yet there's still people who do that yet still reject what we can observe in a natural sense.
Right.
Yes, it's Francis Collins. But yeah, what would you say to something like that, where religion does cause such ignorance that what we see and what we preserve and what perceive and what we can measure, we
Mhm.
just deny it.
Well, for those guys that they see like irreconcilable differences between the religious and scientific paradigm, they can't actually go out there and be like, okay, I'm going to outdo the science and find science that will contradict that science, unless they're going towards pseudoscience and like folks that are not accepted by academia. So what they can do is develop their understanding of religion more, like adopt a different paradigm, maybe go towards metaphysics, go towards mysticism. Because if they look at the Bible and they're like, okay, there's a disagreement here, how do we know like that the Bible was all that is there? Like he could go into the Apocrypha, he could go into Gospel of Thomas, he could look into a lot of things. He could start thinking like Thomas Aquinas, you know. uh, so in a sense, he might be restricting his view of science and restricting his view of religion. So he has to change his frame set. You can't look at the world and kind of go against what you see, what you hear, what you feel. If your senses are saying one thing, you have to go with what is measurable, what is tried and true. I mean, there are like folks with these religious ideas, but sometimes those ideas could be delusional, and it could be because of their understanding of religion too.
For sure. So that's actually the questions from my side here. And I know Moose sent in. He's not available right now, but he did send in the questions he wanted to ask.
Hmm.
So I'll ask those now on his behalf.
Yeah, sounds
And
good.
just to be fair, I know we spent around 2 to 5 minutes per question that I asked. So we'll do the same. We'll spend around 5 minutes per question that he asked here.
All right.
So the first question that he sent me was, why do you assume dual kafil in chapter 21, verse 85 to 86 is Buddha? Why do you or Mika Ben David insert Buddha to a name that is unknown? Isn't that a fallacious attempt to make a connection and academic dishonesty?
I wouldn't say it's academic dishonesty. You have scholars such as Abu Kalam Azad that said the same thing, and then there's the Common Ground Project. They've also Hamza Yusuf. He kind of briefly mentioned that as well. Now, is dual kafil Buddha? That we do not know for certain, and that's why even in my book I stated that even if dual kafil is not Gautama Siddhartha, there's still a huge possibility that Buddha might be a prophet of Islam, considering that Islam recognizes 124,000 prophets and 315 messengers sent to every nation in in the world. So I'm not saying definitively that Dul Kifl is Buddha. It's not an Arabic word. Kifl is not an Arabic word, and it's believed to be derived from Kipal or Kapilavastu, which is the kingdom or the region of Shakyamuni Buddha. But is Dul Kifl Buddha? That we don't know. I mean, there's been some attempts to say that Khizar himself was the primordial Buddha. these are all speculations. These are good speculations, and it's very healthy to have this type of discourse. Because, like I said, the problem that you see right now with religionists is that they restrict their worldview. So when people start thinking along these lines, what this does is it creates dialogue, and then you could go into further narrations and see if there's actually some support. And now, I don't hold the view that Dul Kifl necessarily 100% is Buddha. I do feel that it is an interesting way of looking at things. I mean, the name has been connected with Obadiah as well as Ezekiel as well. But Ezekiel already has a name in Arabic, which is Hizkiel. So,
Hi guys.
hello.
Hey, Moose, you're delayed here. So I already started asking your questions.
Which one did you ask?
We just finished asking question 1 that you
Okay.
sent in WhatsApp. So I'll actually continue to ask those just to keep the flow here.
Actually,
And
you know what? The thing is, I kind of wanted to ask the question specifically. I apologize for the delay.
alright.
I have a friend.
No worries. I just want to keep like the flow of the discussion going. But if you want to pick up or ask question 2 and forward,
Yeah.
just be mindful that we did mention that per question that you ask, we're going to give 5 minutes up uninterrupted to Author Faiz King to give his explanation.
Okay. Just the thing is, hang on. You asked. I'm just double checking which one you asked. So
I asked question 1.
Okay, 1 second. I just have a memory. So yes, you asked the question, why do you assume Dhul Qifl in chapter 21, verse 85 to 86 is Buddha? Why do you,
Yes.
or Micah bin David, insert Buddha into a name that is unknown? Isn't that a fallacious attempt to making a connection academically dishonest?
Yes, and because you missed the last 5 minutes, Author Faiz King was just finishing up his answer here.
Okay.
Yeah. So Author Faiz King, how about because 30 seconds to a minute of the interruptions you can take, and then at 38 minutes here, we'll ask Moose will ask you question number 2.
All right. So, do you want me to
Go
kind
ahead.
of recap what I said?
Yeah, recap, summarize, and
Yeah. So basically, Dul Kifl, right? In my book, I don't say that he is Buddha. I said that there's some scholars that actually brought that up, and it is an interesting thing to bring up. And even the Common Ground Project, which was promoted by Dalai Lama, mentions the possibility of Dul Kifl being Buddha. So it's come up quite a few times in the Muslim world. Now, does Dul Kifl have to be Buddha? No, of course not. And the thing is, Islam has 124,000 prophets, most of which are actually unnamed. So even if Dul Kifl isn't Buddha, we can't still say that Buddha is not a prophet, nor can we say conclusively that he is. What we can do is look at scriptural similarities between like Hamaqada and uh, and what's out there in Islam, which they actually do in the Common Ground Project. So I don't think it's academic dishonesty. I do think what it does is that it opens dialogue and opens possibilities. So when even like if I say Zulkarnain, I can't say definitively that he's Alexander the Great, because there are scholars that would say that it could be Cyrus, because that kind of matches with the Bible's mention of Cyrus, or it could potentially be Darius as well, because all three figures are called the two-horned one, and they both have contact with foreign or neighboring tribes.
All right. So I won't ask a rebuttal question because, again, for the sake of time, like as Nick mentioned earlier, so we'll keep the flow going.
All right.
So you mentioned the 124,000 prophets. It's going to kind of ties into the first one. So you claim there were 124,000 revolutionaries in your book who are the so-called prophets. But I want to ask you this. None of the Sahih Hadith, none of the authentic narrations ever mentions the number of prophets. The 124,000 prophets comes from Ibn Hibban, which was narrated by Abu Dhar. The same hadith which claims, it's the number of messengers. However, this narration is considered dhaif or weak by Islamic standards. So why would you pick a weak narration to make a point, to talk about your? Why would you pick a weak narration?
Not sure. I mean, maybe it is weak, but it appears a lot in Sufi.
It appears, but
yeah.
it's a weak narration.
Mhm.
So that's the question I'm asking.
Right.
Why would you pick a weak narration? There are plenty of Sahih sources. Why pick a dhaif source?
Yeah. Well, it's definitely not like 19 to 26 prophets as the number of named prophets in the Quran, because if you look at prophets that were sent to every nation in the world, that's going to go into the thousands. Now, will it be 124,000 or 248,000, as William Chittick says some narrations talk about? I mean, I don't know, but the number 19 to 26 is exponentially small if you're considering the
Okay,
fact.
I'm talking about why would you use a
I use
dhaif
it
source?
because it's something like it's found it's very prevalent in Sufi literature. Like almost every, not every, but there's a ton of books on Sufism and metaphysics that uses that number. So it's quite common. Like for example, there's a narration that
So in essence,
Yo,
what I'm getting-
let Moose let him finish the
Okay.
thing. Yeah.
yeah. So there's a narration where they say that the prophet said that seek knowledge even to China. Now, people haven't been able to confirm the authenticity of it. Some say it's weak, right?
That's actually a false narration. It's Maudu.
Yeah. So
It's Maudu, so fabricated completely.
yeah, but there are narrations that are similar
There are none.
in
They're actually all Maudu.
in theme. So sometimes that is an issue where it's like, you have something that's almost universally expressed, but it might not. Um, there are some lesser narrations that say something thematically consistent. Now, why did I keep that? Basically because William Chittick was one of my favorite scholars, and I wanted to maintain his voice. And the book does. I give a little bit of voice to all these different scholars and present their views. Uh, is it absolutely correct that there was 124,000 prophets? Maybe not, but there was a ton of prophets, because the Quran does say they were sent to every nation on earth throughout the ages. So it's not going to be in the hundreds, it's going to be in the thousands. Where that number ends, I don't know.
All right. Thank you for answering my question.
Mhm.
This is the third question I'm going to ask. So you claim that in your book that the Quran fails to mention Hinduism because it's not a defined religion.
Mhm.
However, has it occurred to you that the author of the Quran did not know about Hinduism or consider Hinduism a false polytheistic faith? Or even the author of the Quran is not even interested in Hinduism?
Yeah, these are all great points. It seems like from what I've read, Muhammad was familiar with Buddhism and the trade routes. They've had contact with people of these different religions. Hinduism, I would imagine he would have some understanding of it. Now, was this something that was unknown to the author? I don't think so. It would be odd if, like, the Hindu pantheon, the names were like put into the scripture itself, because there's that saying that says that every scripture was sent in the language of its people. So if you start putting in Sanskrit terms with these different gods or these different names, it wouldn't really resonate with the Arab people. So that's why there's a focus on deities and pantheons that they're familiar with. Yeah, I mean, it is definitely a good question, but I don't think it's out of ignorance. I think it's more out of practicality that those names were omitted.
And
But
you,
Author Faiz King, on that point, like
Mhm.
there's other cultures, like the Norwegian culture is a lot further away than to India than the
Mhm.
let's say the
Arabia.
Arabian Peninsula. Yet they have a very similar structure for their Paraphernal gods or Paraphernal
Mhm.
gods. So
Yeah.
for Lord Indra, you have the equivalent of Odin or Thor
Mhm.
and such. Water, you have the god of water Poseidon in Greece,
Mhm.
and if a land that's further away could make a similar structure, why is it hard for the Arabian Peninsula to do that?
Wait, are you saying like why didn't Arabia replicate the
Or no, I'm just saying you mentioned that
Uh-huh.
if they had to bring in, let's say, the names or Sanskrit names, it wouldn't really correlate too much for the
Mhm.
Arabian Peninsula or people in the Arabian Peninsula to read, as it didn't quite suit their poetic um,
Right.
scripture. But when they were able to translate the names and create something similar to in the language of the
Mhm.
Norwegian people or in Greece and such,
They,
why
they
wasn't a translation done?
Yeah, I mean they could do like placeholder terms, but I'm not sure what that would mean. Like for example, dul kifl. We know that that's not an Arabic word, right? Kifl definitely is not an Arabic word. So because of that, you don't get much narration speaking about what dul kifl is. So if those names did exist in the Quran, people would probably be a little mute about it. I don't think, and the number of narrations would probably drop. Like they'd probably just kind of be like, "Oh, okay, that's interesting," and just not talk about it. That's my understanding, at least.
But wouldn't that, if in your opinion, wouldn't that boost the Quran because it actually assist it, being that it's supposed to be authored by the divine? Wouldn't it actually be a boost?
It would probably for people of this time period, not so much for the people of that time period.
All right,
Nick,
so Moose, on this point, like we got 13 minutes for the first hour,
okay,
and yeah, I know we got like two more questions, I believe.
yeah,
So I think it would fit perfectly in that sense. Before we move to audience questions here, so if you want to shoot your next question, and in the Discord, we'll have a more detailed discussion about the answers.
all right, perfect. So now, you claim that Abu Bakr united the Muslim community with a statement, like he said a specific statement in your book.
Mm-hmm.
Are you aware of the Saqifa incident? And also, are you aware that Abu Bakr is despised by Shia Muslims to this day? So, how is this saving Islam? And
Yeah, I'm kind of aware of that. Like the Shias in general, they regard the caliphs as politicians, and they don't have the same kind of view. The That statement I kind of got from my understanding of watching PBS's Empire of Faith, and I felt that it works within the context there.
but
Um,
historically speaking, it's not consistent with history because I'll clarify this question because during Abu Bakr's time, you had the Rida Wars, you also, which are wars of apostasy, or then you even had the incident with Ali, where he actually burned down Ali's wife's, Fatima's house, who's the daughter of the Prophet.
mhm,
And then there's the Saqifa incident as well.
mhm.
And he's also seen as someone who took Ali's right away from being the true successor to
Yeah, yeah. I
Muhammad.
mean,
So
I
how,
understand this
how
partisan.
is he? How is he, in your claim, uniting the Muslim community when he divided them?
Yeah, I definitely see your claim. That's why, like in my book, I tried my best not to go too much into Sunnism or Shiism. I've tried to present Ali as someone in a very positive light as well. And that's where the problem is. Like, if you're like nonpartisan, like how do you best present these individuals? Now, with Abu Bakr's statement that um, do not worry about Muhammad. If you worship Muhammad, know that he is dead. If you worship God, know that he is alive. Now, personally feel that statement was important because it kind of solidifies the idea that the prophet was just a human. Get over it. Don't cry about it. Now, did I give him too much importance? I'm not sure. Maybe I did.
Yeah, and I kind of wanted to, the thing with that is Abu Bakr also did not even attend Muhammad's funeral as well. Were you aware of that?
I was not aware, but I mean, it's always great to have a Shia perspective on.
Oh no, this is history. This is history. Tabari is
Yeah,
history.
yeah. Because when you go through Sunni sources, right, they present a more ideal.
Now keep in mind, I use a Sunni source that is earlier. Like, these are classical Sunni sources also affirm this. They confirm these events.
Yeah. I definitely know about the strife that existed between those different schools of thought, those different positions, Shiism, Sunniism. That is obviously a problem when you write a book. It's like, how do I present these folks as impartially as possible?
All right. Yeah, it would be definitely. I kind of agree with you on that. It would definitely be a struggle considering the divide. So I'm just pulling up my last question just for the interest.
That's a great point, actually.
Yeah. No, I'm glad. I really wish we weren't tied with time. All right. So you claim, in your book, you claim that you wanted to see Allah as a mathematician, a scientist. You claim that Allah is a scientist. Yet in the Quran, he's made some scientific errors. One glaring example I have is chapter 41, verses 9 to 12, where it takes Allah twice as long to create a tiny planet like Earth, and to create so it takes him 4 days to create Earth, but then the rest of the universe he creates in 2 days. The heavens, that is, he creates them in 2 days.
Right.
So how is that an efficient scientist, or is Allah very inefficient, or why did it take him so long? If he's such a scientist or mathematician, why did it take him longer to build our tiny planet?
There's probably, I mean, like, metaphysically speaking, perhaps there's more element involved here. We know, like, Adam, he was given the spirit of God, right?
No, I'm not talking about Adam. I'm talking about the Earth. It's a very tiny planet compared to the sun, compared to many other planets in the universe. So why
even in our solar system, Jupiter, mountains?
Yes, and Jupiter also has complex systems. Each of these planets has complex systems. So why did Earth take longer than the rest of the universe?
I don't know. That's actually a good question, but I don't have the answer for that one.
All right. Thank you so much. Nick, do you or myself want to ask another question, or do you want to go to the audience?
I actually put the link for the StreamYard in the audience. So I think as people do come on, we can probably ask one more question. But for those of you who want to make a point here, I remember TJ Singh and I were discussing. He had a few points, and Thinking Clearly also had a few points on. So if they want to come on and share their question, they're more than welcome to.
Yeah, that would be.
And you can even type in your question in the chat as well if you want us to highlight it. By the way, I do have a friend of mine who's of a Muslim background. We'll keep his name anonymous for
security reasons and non-death threats.
So he's of a Muslim background. I shared only excerpts of the book, so he's not super familiar with your book. But he does have one question, that is. So all right. So here's my friend.
Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Not bad, not bad. How are you?
Good.
Okay, so my question is, you claim that you're using a gender neutral approach, God, like God, like Leslie Hazelton. Yet throughout your book, you've referred to God as he and him.
Right.
So why is that? Why not pick a goddess?
Like when I'm usually on social media, Instagram, I use she for God, kind of confuses people. The Sufis use hu, Hu. So if I had to redo my book again, I would probably use HU. But I've been trying to, like, if you look in the notes section of my book, eliminate the use of he as much as possible. Now, certain areas I didn't want to warp the quotation, because sometimes a scholar might say something about God and they say, and he. So I don't want to warp the quotation and remove the words he. But yeah, like something that would be thematically consistent with my approach, I would use the word hu, because that is generally regarded as gender neutral.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, Faiz, I think, do you feel it's probably a force of habit that you used the word him?
I tried not to. That's why in the notes section, I said that I tried to eliminate the use of him and he as much as possible. But even during the edit, I've noticed that there were a few instances where he, him appeared. So it could have been something subconscious.
Yeah. Well, Doorknob Head has an interesting point. How about saying it? Because God might be a machine sitting in the corner of someone's dusty basement.
Maybe. I don't know.
That's a very good point.
If we are in a simulation, then yeah, it might be
Yeah.
the case.
I think we can still ask a few more questions. Nick, what do you think?
Yes, so I actually have an audience member who sent me some questions as well, and they did read the book. So they have 4 questions here, and I'll ask them one by one so we can get the answers to those as well. So a quotation from Faiz's book, and the specific place is chapter 3, Inheritors of the Earth, page 58. Now, only with your permission, I'll pull up that, but in that case, we'll just leave it audio based so people don't like screen capture and read parts of your book. But the specific quote itself is, earlier we have mentioned how Neanderthals and anatomically modern humans had comparable cranial capacities and therefore similar cognitive range. This isn't the case with earlier prototypical humans. God appears to be improving upon the formula with time, phasing out genetically inferior species by divinely guided means to natural selection. My question is, why would God create earlier humans with less cognitive ability when presumably he has the power to create modern humans from scratch? Why does God need to improve on his formula by phasing out genetically inferior humans when he could just have created the perfect formula to start with?
Right. I mean, that is a good question as well. With God, right? In the Quran, his names are basically Al-Bari, which means the evolver, as well as he has another name that's somewhat similar called the fashioner of forms. So there is that theme that whatever he creates developmentally and over time periods, and you could see that with the creation of the different fauna and flora in the different eras as well. Kun be and it is, right? That expression I believe is more cosmogenic, more towards his role as Al Khaliq, the creator. So in the beginning of the heavens, at some point he must have said, "Be and it is," and that's what put things into motion. But as far as life on Earth, the general decree has always been developmental, to have things happen in stages. And there's a verse in the Quran that talks about how man's form, his joints have been updated or upgraded with time. And there's also a reference that if God wanted, he could replace us with another type of being. So the idea that there were other hominids before us, it's not particularly like heretical. I mean, it fits in with whatever the Quran is saying. Now, if man was the final product, could he have just started from man? Yeah, sure, he could have just started from man, but that's not the approach he took.
Now, on that note, like just to expand on that, wouldn't then we be saying Adam was that if life started off with Adam, and we consider him to be a prophet or a perfect being, then how did the evolution start? Wouldn't that be contradictory? Either Adam existed as a perfect being, or we started off climbing up, starting from common ancestors between apes.
Yeah. So I mean, the statement goes back to be and it is, right? Kun fa yakunu, right? That phrase. Now, Adam was he was perfect. I mean, that's the whole idea of the anatomically modern human. That aesthetically speaking, that's the point of perfection. And Yuval Noah also mentioned that you know, humans just pretty much came out of nowhere, like, you know, like in terms of the general timeline, it was a very rapid sequence of events. So yeah, I mean, like, on the one hand, you do have these beings that came before, and you also have like Islamic thought saying that angels and jinns also predated mankind. And then you have Adam. Adam was basically like it kind of like a bioengineered experiment. He was just implanted on Earth. We even find elsewhere that his origins were actually potentially heavenly, right? So he was taken at some point, and this is where the Quran isn't particularly specific about geographic location, whether Eden is on Earth or whether it's on heaven, but he was basically implanted. So to that extent, evolution doesn't apply necessarily to those two human beings, Adam and Eve. They were kind of like a little bit incongruent with what came before and what came after. Everything that came before Adam evolved, and everything that came after Adam and Eve also evolved. It was just Adam and Eve was just this bizarre, unnatural experiment.
Yeah.
So Thinking Clearly has a question. Why does God need to? Sorry, Nick. Why does God need to experiment unless he didn't know how to build a perfect human from the start? So that's the question in front of you.
I don't know. I think this was more about an approach that he took. He probably did know how to make a human, but he wanted to see a more of a developmental kind of progressive kind of elaboration to all of this. I can't really get into God's mind there, you know.
Yeah, we would have to sit with him and talk about
Yeah.
that. But like from that, I would actually have a question. Many of these perfect people that you would talk about, whether it be Adam, Noah, or Jesus, if they are the perfect beings that God did create, let's say, for example, they did exist, why isn't there any archaeological proof that they existed? For example, Jesus, the guy who founded Christianity, we can't find any archaeological evidence for him. Not even the Romans wrote about him.
Right.
Why would that be the case? Why can't we find solid evidence that we would for the same as we find for these archaic humans with like Australopithecus or Neanderthals or Denisovans?
Well, one of the reasons has to do with how these religious sites are protected. Like a lot of the areas where these so-called prophets lived, they performed pilgrimage or whatnot. Those areas have been forbidden to excavation, so you can't like dig it up because those areas are protected by the government. Now, things like Adam and Eve, they would be. It's like finding a needle in a haystack. If they lived like 200 to 400,000 years ago, assuming that, like scientifically speaking, the first anatomically modern human, it would be them, right? So if you had to find them, I'm not really sure what the approach would be because it's like you're trying to isolate two people, right? Let's look at it another way. after 9/11, they tried to find Osama bin Laden. It took them a decade to find someone that they already know how he lives. Mullah Omar, they've never found him, which was the founder of the Taliban, right? So
No,
these
no,
are
no.
modern human beings, and we're
No, I know.
talking about
This is talking about finding evidence for their existence. We still had existence for Osama bin Laden
We
existing.
knew, yeah, we
Yeah,
knew
we
Osama
knew
bin
of
Laden
him.
existed, but
Mhm.
we
We just
don't
didn't know
know
where he
that.
was hiding.
Adam and Eve.
So we're
Um,
talking, and Adam and Eve are not people hiding. Technically, we're just saying,
right,
asking from a
but
historian's perspective,
yeah,
not so much an investigative, but a historian's perspective.
I don't think it would be possible. They're just too far back in human history. The only way you could find them is by accident. Now, Jesus is a special case because he wasn't that far back in human history. But again, like one of the previous presentations we did about Jesus is that he wasn't a material person. He didn't have any material possessions. He gave away his comb. He gave away his jug of water, according to some of the ascetic sayings. Um, and there's still a lot of debate about what actually happened to him. Did he ascend physically? Is his body still on earth? Is it in Jerusalem? Is it in Kashmir? Is it in Tibet? Because different scriptures, apocrypha, different sayings say different things. The Gnostics say something different. Um, so I don't know. I mean, like, it's hard to say. Is he even on earth or is he like elsewhere?
Yeah, but like for my point is like when you say we can't pinpoint where he is to start looking.
Mhm,
Let's take the Romans for example, where they were meticulous in noting down almost everything that they did.
mhm.
But why would they not
Oh, because they did a
note
bad
down?
job at record keeping. That might be one of the reasons.
Well, no,
No,
their record keeping was
they,
amazing.
No, no,
yeah,
Yeah,
not the
yeah.
Romans. I'm
records.
talking about
And
the folks at the time of Christ. Maybe they didn't do a good job.
now, keep in mind these. There was an entire trial that this Jesus character had. Wouldn't there be notes about that trial itself
I don't think
in
it's
front
been
of a Roman judge?
I don't think it's been recorded that well because even like if you look at the canonical gospels, they have different number of witnesses. So what happened? Like there's even people saying that they loaded him up with aloe vera so that he could heal again. um, so
So yeah, and like I'll also ask the next question as well. So this number two out of the four that this audience member sent. In the Great Regional Flood, chapter 4, page 86 to 87, you argue for the possibility of Noah being able to live for 1,000 years by citing calculations done by Paul Stats that worked out if you removed all diseases.
mhm.
The average age of a human before accident or injury killed them would be 8,938 years. While this is a nice thought experiment, it would not take into account that all current theories of aging include other reasons for dying besides disease, whether through natural wear and tear of the organs or through programmed deterioration in our DNA. So,
Mhm.
how could uh, a human realistically live even a few centuries
Mhm.
when these other elements would lead to the breakdown of the human body and organ failure through the natural aging cycle?
Yeah, I mean that motherboard article was kind of like a thought experiment, and it said that the maximum lifespan is close to 9,000 years, which is almost 10 times that of how old Noah lived. I would assume that during Noah's time, this was antediluvian civilizations. That these people didn't have as much disease burden. They were probably not interbreeding as heavily with neighboring tribes of hominids and archaic hominids at the time. So their disease burden might have been less. So Noah might have still been an extreme exception at 900. Maybe it was something closer to 150 or 200 or something like that.
Yeah, and I'll ask the next question as well because it's somewhat in relation. In
Mhm.
relation to question two, why would we even assume that Noah was able to have the immunity to even the most common forms of disease, let alone every disease possible?
It's not just Noah. Like people back then likely didn't have as much diseases as people nowadays, right? When the world got closer and the world became more cosmopolitan, that means different people started kind of getting together, right? Uh, and it's not just people. Like in my book, I've mentioned how there were other tribes, like the Denisovans and the Neanderthals, from which they've traced different genetic diseases too, as well as our propensity towards nicotine and mental health. Uh, these may have came from other hominids, not entirely from humans. Um, so I'm speculating that back then, whatever that time period was, and this is where the problem lies. We don't know when Noah lived, right? If we had a more concrete date, like where he lived, we could kind of speculate a little bit further. And the Bible doesn't actually do a good job in terms of keeping track of lineages. There's a lot of holes in the record. They're missing several individuals, so so we can't rely on that either. Um, so that's why I do feel it's going to be a big question mark for a while. But I do applaud Motherboard's kind of look into this as a thought experiment.
Yeah, and the next question he asked is: You claim it is entirely conceivable that the disease burden of antediluvian populations may have been minuscule
Hmm.
enough to sustain individuals with centuries-long lifespan. On
Hmm.
what basis are you making this claim? I've read various articles where curing the biggest killers like cancer and heart disease would
Hmm.
only add a few more years to average life expectancy, certainly not decades, let alone centuries or millennia. On what basis could we claim that the disease burden in pre flood times would allow for centuries of life, especially in a time with no reliable modern healthcare and where pathogens were as prevalent as any other time in human history?
But where are we getting the idea that pathogens were more prevalent or just as prevalent as any other time in human history? That's also an assumption. What I'm basing it on is on the Motherboard article, which is more or less a thought experiment.
For sure. So that's it from the questions that I got in private message. So now I would open it up to the floor for any audience member to join in and ask any questions or have any discussion points on what's been discussed till now.
Hmm.
In the meantime, if you Moose, if you want to ask a question as well.
Yeah, no, I can ask a question in the meantime. Nick, you can post the link down there. Um, so my question. Um, so here's another question I had while I was reading your book, Faiz.
Hmm.
So why do you assume that jinns are from other hominid species? Because this idea contradicts the Quran.
Hmm.
In chapter 15, verse 27, the Quran says, jinns are made of fire and scorching wind.
Hmm.
Now, were the Homo erectus made of fire and scorching wind? And also, did Muhammad encounter something like Neanderthals when chapter 72, Surah Jinn, was revealed? And weren't these hominid species extinct, assuming Muhammad actually encountered them around 610, 620?
Yeah. So basically, the way I look at jinns is like strictly Quranic, like that they predated mankind. That Surah Bakr, for example, alludes to the beings as being flesh and blood entities. Now, jinns being created out of scorching wind or out of smokeless fire. This is very similar to how we look at humans as being made out of clay. But it wasn't so much humans, it was just Adam, basically. Adam was made out of clay, no one else. So regarding jinns, the ancestor of the jinns, or the progenitor jinn, the very first jinn, was likely made out of like smokeless fire. And it's possible that there might have been a splinter group that was made out of scorching wind, because in the Quran we also have that as a celestial, a primordial substance for the composition of jinns. But I don't expect any other representatives other than the very, very first in the entire tree being created out of these primordial substances. So I guess the same way Adam was an experiment, maybe the first jinn was also an experiment. So I don't think that necessarily carries over, that the jinn from nowadays are made out of smokeless fire. And Muhammad's encounters with the jinns, this could have been anything. Like in the literature, we have jinns as even being other nomadic tribes as well. So the definition of jinn is quite flexible, and it's a little bit on the nebulous side of the spectrum. But what we do know is that, like, other than angels and other than like modern man, there's only really two other categories. One is the jinn and the shayateen, which is like interdimensional entities, which is kind of beyond the scope of my book, actually.
Just
Yeah.
to actually ask a follow-up question. Many scholars, including Sheikh Yusuf al-Qardawani, and most scholarly consensus is that jinn are, and even in hadith too, hadith as well as Islamic literature, jinns are the kind of beings that we cannot see. Why would you reject this idea that they're beings that we cannot see with our eyes? Why would you reject these opinions?
Well, I go back to certain narrations. Like I remember in our last presentation, we brought up a narration about how the jinns used to cause bloodshed on Earth. And you know, they were cleansed by Iblis's army and so forth. So they must have likely been seen. I think the word of the unseen.
But then this is assumptions, right? These are just assumptions.
No, they're not assumptions, because even if you go into like the books of Enoch, they have the same narrative that you see in the Hadiths, and they talk about jinn as being pushed to the mountainside, or
No, but do they use the word jinn in the book of Enoch?
no, they use other terms like watchers.
So why would you assume that these are the same?
Because it's the same description, they're just using different terms.
How are they the same description?
Because they're talking about Iblis and
No. How are the jinn the same description exactly?
it says they were causing blood and mischief and
No, not causing blood. Their physical description, was it the same?
There's no physical description even in the Quran for the jinn.
There is. I just mentioned chapter 15, verse 27. They're made of scorching fire, scorching wind, and fire.
That's not present jinns. That's the progenitor of the
So,
jinns.
so what?
What's the name again? What's the
chapter 15, verse 27?
Well, the Quran says that humans are made of water, right? So that's the first humans, right? I mean, yeah, you could argue that we're composed of water, but when it says that humans are created out of clay and water, right?
But wouldn't hominid species be created from clay and water as well, assuming you're using that? So where does fire and scorching wind come from then?
The first humans were created out of clay and water, right? Not me and you, right?
Huh?
You're not created out of clay, right?
No. Hang on. I'm talking about jinns right here.
Yeah, the same analogy applies. The jinns that exist today, they're not created.
How do you know that jinns today are different?
How do you know that humans today are different?
That's actually argument out of ignorance. You're making a fallacious claim. You're actually backtracking. How do you claim? You're making the claim. I'm not making any claims. We're asking you questions. How do you assume that today's jinns are not made of fire or scorching wind?
I mean, that's in their primordial composition. The same way angels, they say they're made out of light. God is made out of light. Humans made out of clay. these are at the level of the base elements, meaning when those species were first started out, that's what they were made out of. So I think TJ doing this
Yeah,
good.
yeah, and yeah, we'll open it up to more audience questions here. TJ, hey, welcome onto the show.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So yeah, is there any points and such that you want to bring up or discuss with Author Faiz King on the air?
Just have one particular question. I guess Christians do make a typical argument that Jesus Christ died for the sins of humanity. I was wondering to get Faz's view on what this would mean psychologically and also physiologically. What would this claim mean?
Yeah. So my whole issue about the idea of Christ dying for the sins of humanity is intuitively it doesn't make sense to me. Like say I had no religion whatsoever. I would prefer to be accountable for what I do, right? I wouldn't want someone to come in and kind of take my place because it sounds a little odd to me. And the thing is, in terms of original sin, um, with Jesus being a blood sacrifice for the deeds that Adam and Eve committed, in both the religions that came before Christianity and the religion that came after, Judaism and Islam, the concept of blood sacrifice is nullified because in Judaism, Adam and Eve were forgiven, and in Islam, Adam and Eve were forgiven as well, except they were elevated in status. So not only were they forgiven, they were made God's representatives on earth. So the idea that Christians kind of went with the whole blood sacrifice thing, it doesn't fit in with the religion that came before or the religion that came in after. Now, let's say let's say hypothetically speaking that the crucifixion was legit and he did die for the sins of humanity. This would be, since it doesn't really make sense on an intuitive level, it should have remained on the level of esotericism, meaning it shouldn't have been a mainstream idea or a concept. It should have been something that would be left to the mystics. The fact that it's a mainstream concept and it doesn't intuitively resonate, at least with me, that's where I find it problematic. Now, if someone told me Prometheus died for my sins, I don't know what to say. I mean, like, okay. Like, it doesn't make sense to me conceptually. And that's the same issue with Jesus. Like, it doesn't make sense for me conceptually that he died for my sins. I'd rather him not dying for my sins.
Yeah, it's always something that I've wanted to ask because, you see it has more significance in a metaphysical sense.
Yeah, and I feel it should have remained that way if it was true at all,
Yeah, which is why I'm curious because I tend to see things more from my psychological perspective and also, from like a physiological point of view. So I know I was curious because haven't gotten an answer to this question.
All right. Hopefully, I was able to
Yeah.
help a little bit with that.
Yeah, because it's always been something because that aspect of Christianity has always been I guess food for thought, but at times also mind-boggling as well. That a sort of for lack of a better phrase, a scapegoat, was given to us.
Scapegoat. It's a very anti-natural way of looking at things, right? It doesn't resonate. That's the issue.
Interesting. Thank you. Appreciate that.
No problem. Oh yeah, Muhammad flying to the heavens. Well, the thing with Muhammad flying to the heavens on a Barak, it's not an article of faith. Like the crucifixion for mainstream Christians, it is an article of faith. Now, you have Muslims that actually don't believe in that, because the Burak doesn't appear in the Quran, right? And then you have Muslims that would say the Burak was a spacecraft or a vehicle that Gabriel used. You actually have these perspectives. So this is an area where you don't have to necessarily believe in the winged donkey. I mean, it's not like you're not a Muslim if you don't believe in it. But with mainstream Christianity, you have to have the concept of the crucifixion.
And Muslims do celebrate the Muhammad's ascension to heaven.
Yeah, they celebrate it, but it's not like, if it never, let's say it doesn't exist, it won't affect my faith, you know?
So this is another question we have. Surely it meant that everyone was not born Jewish was a sinner. Jesus opened up God to everyone.
Well, wasn't God always open to everyone?
That's the question they're asking you.
Yeah, I think access to God has always, like, the door was always open. I don't think, like, after Adam did his little mishaps, that God threw a fit, and you know, he had to wait thousands and thousands of years for Jesus, his son, supposedly, to come on earth to undo Adam's mistake. I don't think that makes sense.
Yeah. All right. And Thinking Clearly has this question as well.
Mm-hmm.
So the ants that could talk in Arabic, rational or esoteric?
Well, recently they found out, like, ants actually can communicate with, like, certain vocalizations. I don't think it would be Arabic. The idea here is that Solomon could understand these different languages. So I don't think the ant is speaking in Arabic, but whatever it was speaking in those vocalizations, Solomon would be an ant whisperer, so he would understand that.
All right. So I think I have a question on my end as well that was sent. So it's a question. It's a very general question somebody sent me via text. You claim that you are looking from a secular point of view.
Mm-hmm.
But why do you use only the Abrahamic faiths, more so Islam, as a basis for your view in your book?
I do feel that Islam, to some extent, kind of, you know, as a religion that's always in the news, that's always affecting world politics. I do feel it kind of closes the grasp between the Eastern religions, whether it's through Sufism or the Western paradigms such as Christianity and Judaism. I do emphasize Buddhism. Maybe it doesn't actually show that way in the book, but I do have incredible appreciation for Buddhism, and I see it as a Brahminic counterpart to Islam, like I've mentioned in my book. And yeah, go on.
I think there's another question that was sent to me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to read this. Why do you assume that characters like Azrael, Gabriel, Michael, and Seraphiel, if I'm saying that correct, are real? Has it occurred to you that these characters are fictional, or are probably fictional?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've always believed that angels were real, but I don't have that that kind of new age kind of perspective that you know, the angels are like floating around, that you can summon them, that you can call upon them, that they bless you in the morning, and you go out for a walk and you can communicate with. No, I believe these angels were like literal beings, that they were you know, like aliens basically.
All right. Yeah, I just have a list of these questions I was sent. There's another interesting one. Would you ignore polytheism and animism, or would you entertain those ideas?
I feel polytheism, if like there's an emergent monotheistic component to it, that, like, you know, all of these gods are pointing at a certain greater god, that's okay. Animism, I'm okay with too. It kind of borders between pantheism and panentheism. it's not something that I would gravitate towards, but it's not something that I would dismiss either.
All right. There's another question I have here. The God you picked, what's his name? Is his name Yahweh, Elohim, Allah, Zeus, Dushara, Ahura Mazda, Bhagavan? What's the God's name that you're using here?
The God I'm using here is basically Allah, Araha, Ahura, Bhagavan, not Zeus. Zeus is something else.
No, but these gods are technically different, though.
I think the differences are more related to cultural transmission and cultural understanding. When I use the word God, my understanding is that this is an omnipotent being, right? So Zeus is not omnipotent because he he was tricked many times. He had issues with his consorts, and
the only thing omnipotent about Zeus was the fact that if you point someone, he would get a child.
Yeah. Zeus was quite the player.
Yeah, that would be the only trait. So for me, any god that that fulfills the definition of omnipotence would be the God that I'm talking about.
Right. Yeah. Another question I had here sent to me. Author Faiz, you claim that Islam is Jewish Christianity, but Jews already had a last prophet, Malachi. So doesn't Muhammad's very prophethood go against Jewish teaching?
Well, when I meant that statement, right, that Islam marries the Mosaic traditions with Christianity, I do feel like it's a true continuity, that it preserves the dietary and legal systems of Judaism with some modification, and you see that in Islamic law, Islamic theology, and kosher halal system. So that's built in, right? And it also preserves the Christology and the spirituality of Christianity while acknowledging the New Testament prophets. So I see it as kind of like a fusion of Judaism and Christianity. So if Islam didn't have a name, Jewish Christianity would be an appropriate term.
But I think the question they were asking about was Malachi, the last prophet of Judaism. So doesn't Muhammad's very existence contradict Jewish teachings?
I mean, according to the Jews, yeah, but according to the Muslims, no, because they have a different way of looking at it.
All right. Has a few more questions I have. Sorry. So there's a question. Mani was another prophet who claimed to be the seal of prophets. So who is correct, Muhammad or Mani?
Well,
the founder of Manichaeism. So the founder of Manichaeism was another person years before claimed to be the seal of prophets. So who is correct, Muhammad or Mani?
Well, if Mani was a true prophet of God, I would imagine that his influence would be more global.
That's not relevant, though. So
I mean, if you look at it based on logical fallacies, yeah, it's not relevant. But from my personal view, I feel that if a prophet reaches a certain amount of public acceptance, that they should be regarded as a potential contender.
There's another question this from your book too. This person sent me. So they asked me, how have atheists and secular humanists monopolized the theory of evolution?
Oh, okay. Well, you don't usually see folks presenting the theory of evolution as a religious idea. That's why my book is kind of unique. What you do see is like
not according to Kent Hovind. According to Kent Hovind, evolutionism is worse than Nazism, and it's a religion.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, like for example, when you see folks like Dawkins or Dennett or Sam Harris or Christopher Hitchens, they talk about evolution almost interchangeably with atheism, right? And I feel that to a large extent, they shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be something that, belief in evolution is an atheistic idea, and like, it opposes religion. That's one of the reasons I created this book, was to kind of look into the different sources and the classical sources, and find out whether evolution is also found in religious thought or religious scriptures. So I do feel that it shouldn't be something where it's like one side claims evolution for themselves.
But then, in this point, why, in many cases, would it be considered blasphemous to even consider that evolution is true in many Abrahamic faiths?
It has to do with the whole idea of the fixed archetypes, the immutable archetypes. So a lot of religionists, they look at God as essentially the one that creates perfected beings, and that everything has a certain form, and that form and expression is definitive. It's a perspective, but I think it's a flawed perspective.
Yeah, the thinking clearly has a message here.
Mhm.
So the four horsemen don't talk about evolution and atheism interchangeably. Dawkins himself acknowledges many Christians believe evolution is true.
I think that became more of a cultural thing. Like for many years, religionists, they didn't accept evolution. Even the Vatican, it took them a while to come out and say, "Hey, evolution might be true." And I think this has more to do with the change in the zeitgeist.
But the thing is, the question the original person asked was, why do you feel, or how has atheism or secular humanists have monopolized evolution?
Well, haven't you seen a lot of these talks where people lose faith, right, in religion, and they say, "Hey, it's incompatible with evolution." That's why I moved towards Dawkins, or I started reading The God Delusion. There's a basis to this, maybe it's more at a marketing level rather than at an actual.
I left Islam. I left religion. I didn't even bother with Dawkins, to be honest with you. There's a lot of atheists who don't even bother with Dawkins. They actually read the scripture themselves and find it.
Yeah. I'm not discounting that. There's so many different reasons why someone leaves a religion. It could be rational, it could be emotional, it could be due to evolution. The one area that I wanted to tackle was evolution.
All right. There's another question I have here, just for the interest of time.
Yeah, so just at this point, we'll limit it to maximum of 2 more questions, and then we'll say our opening pieces and switch to Discord.
All right.
Yeah. So there's someone asked this question. You mentioned the story of Iblis tempting Adam in the Quran, but Genesis, it mentions only a serpent that locks its legs for tempting them. Isn't the Quran itself completely changing the story?
Oh yeah, the Quran. The thing with the Quran is that it doesn't match 100% with the Bible. A lot of the narratives have its own unique take, and Muslims in general would say that this is the original version, or the archetype, that it's just been retold through the Quran. So the serpent, which you see in the Bible, which is connected with Iblis, in Islam, he's connected with the Antichrist.
And one last, I think this is the last question we can ask.
Yes.
Okay. Let me just pull this up. I'm just opening the window. Sorry, guys. So, where is it? There we go. So, hang on. God damn it. No, not this one.
No, it's okay.
Sorry. I'm just pulling the question up. So, was it this one? This is a list, right? So I'm like, have I ticked out all the boxes? Sorry, guys. Sorry, guys.
I feel so sorry for your computer's RAM and CPU.
Oh, no.
Yes. So, okay, this last question is religions like Islam divide and rule. They have specific rules for their subjects, the non believers, the Jews and Christians. And
Mhm.
even the Quran states that Jews and Christians cannot be your friends in chapter 5,
Mhm.
verse 54. So, doesn't your secular approach stand in defiance of Islamic doctrine?
Not necessarily, because I'm a Sufi, and I also incorporate perennial philosophy, which is a universalist position that sees all religions as having some element of validity, right? While the Quran does say those things, I feel that the general message is more about connecting the different people and the different religions together.
All right. So on this point, uh, to pay mercy to the audience as well, we're gonna say some closing remarks here. And before we do cut off, I just want to say thank you to Author Faiz King for
And
coming
thank you
on.
for having me.
Yeah, and the only reason why we were able to have this discussion today is that we all pitched in to read the book, and
Hmm.
we were able to come up with the questions. And even though we don't 100%,
Hmm.
the 5 fingers on my hand aren't the same, so you're not going to expect all 4 people on air to.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
actually, I actually, when I wrote the book, I wanted people to look at it, to disagree, to find, you know, like find a way to kind of continue this discourse, because it is a new way of looking at things.
yeah. And in this note, if we do want to push that discussion point further, I'm sure Offer Faiz King will be more than happy to chat if people are willing to read his book, find specific points to actually discuss on, and ask him questions about why he thinks certain things. So if you please do buy the book, if you are watching, please do give it a read. And if there are any questions or concerns, you can always reach out to Dr. Offer Faiz King. Is there a particular place that people can reach out to you in social media?
Well, I'm on Instagram right now, under the handle Author Faiz King.
And
All
yeah,
right.
if Author Faiz, if you could, like, would you be able to join us in Discord?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So
All right.
I'll say my closing statement as well. Overall, again, this is just an assessment. It's going to be some harsh criticism of the book, but overall, I do find the book making many mistakes, that is, and assumptions. Especially, like, it makes many claims, but then especially like the Zulkifl claim, I was like, there you're just inserting something that's not exactly there. You've also
Well,
ignored
I've stated
some.
that Dul Kifl might not be the Buddha, also.
I know you did insert that in, and that's actually in your book.
Right.
And that I found a very fallacious and academically dishonest, because the Quran's supposed to be a perfect book. And on top of that, you've ignored, you kind of use Abu Bakr, but then you kind of ignored history right there. And on top of that, you also make the claim of the jinns being, you're kind of inserting, kind of like mixing evolution, but in the jinn.
Well, that was the whole point of the book.
No, you're kind of like, it's kind of, what do you call it? It's kind of a contradictory to Islamic teaching itself, because the way the jinns are, in Arabian mythology as well as Islamic mythology, are very different. So then, and so if anything, it doesn't make any sense,
Yeah,
because
I was actually
these are
hoping that
extinct.
they would.
These are Now. Let me finish. These
Mhm.
are extinct human species. Extinct human species.
Mhm.
So I don't know if we're seeing dead human, extinct human species in the 7th century that Muhammad encountered, or is this just Arabian mythology? Um, then I what do you call it? You also assume that you assume all the gods are the same, but they're actually not the same, because Elohim is a different god, Yahweh is a different god, Allah is a very different god, Bhagwan is a different god, Baal is a very different god, and these gods were worshipped in different regions, and they were local gods. um,
you also mention Elohim, but it actually means God of gods in your book. Um, I also and Elohim also means children of El as well.
Not
So,
interrupting here, but when does the closing statement come?
oh yeah, no, this is the closing. Just a sort of like a rundown of the statement, and yeah. So overall, I did find your book interesting, but I did find it made many fallacious claims that we can discuss further down the line. But yeah, I found them very. I apologize if I sound a little mean, but yeah, that's my. But I was happy that you offered a different opinion, a differing opinion, and I look forward to having the academic discussion on Discord. And yeah, that's my. But thank you so much, Author Faiz King, for joining us not only this week but previous weeks as well. I know this should have been done early, the book review that is, but we wanted to give time for people to read the book and have a proper constructive criticism. That is so. Yeah, thank you so much, Author Faiz. Thank you so much for, and I apologize for being late. I just had a friend as well who also read excerpts of your book and wanted to ask you his question as well. So but thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, so yeah, Author Faiz King. I know it was a bit much. We almost like dogpiled on you here, but we'll give you some time to make a closing statement, or if you want to make any statements before we drop and go to Discord.
Yeah. So my closing statement is basically, this is a very controversial book. There are claims in the book that I've extensively referenced, and there are original claims in this book based on my reading of very different religions as well as science for the past 25 years. It does require a non-literalistic kind of way of looking at things. So if you have a background in metaphysics, or if you have a background in Sufism or Buddhism, it might potentially appeal to you more. So I don't expect the book to be a slam dunk with people. It's very different from anything that's out there.
And yeah, it's good to have Muslims of other ideologies and other opinions to be represented, because that's our goal, like to see the different Muslims with different who have differing ideologies.
Yeah.
That was. But yeah, Nick, you were saying something.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna mention that it is like Moose did mention that there were things that he didn't agree with, and then there would be traditional Muslims who wouldn't agree with some things that you wrote as well. But like I mentioned, it is a differing opinion of a book, and it's worthy to even just get it to read it and offer a discussion upon it, because it is such a out of the box viewpoint here.
And I believe the book would be a learning experience for people too. Like even if like as a whole, like there's certain areas you disagree with, there's a lot of research in the book. So those are points to explore.
You got you got an entire section for references, and it's quite long. So I can attest to that.
And just to interject, guys, TJ Singh has been silent here, listening in. TJ, do you have any closing statements?
No, I would say not really, but it was just an interesting talk because it's always good to get a different perspective. I think we should be more open-minded to these things. I don't think whether you're a believer or not, just so we can ask questions, and I think unfortunately, a lot of people today are very closed-minded people, and we're not going to be able to get through those people, but I think conversations like this will go a long way in the future. So hopefully we can continue having them. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. So the Discord just has an announcement now. So I guess we'll cut the call here, or this live stream here, and we'll jump on in. So please do join in, guys, for the Discord link.
All right. Thank you, guys. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.